Please be aware that if you are attending this meeting, our meetings are recorded for future viewing, and we are privileged to gather on the traditional territory of the Kwakwaka'wakw. Call the meeting to order. Just wanted to ask council, I know last time it was difficult to hear people, and just feeling like if we have these screens, do you feel comfortable when you're speaking with the mask off, or do you prefer to just continue to keep the mask on for the whole time?
It was okay last meeting. I had no problems.
Okay. Feel the same way, Councillor Mitchell?
Yeah.
I'm good.
Okay. All right, then I just might remind everybody who's speaking, if I can't hear, just to speak a little louder. Just wait a second until the other two arrive. We'll meeting to order. We're just going to the adoption of the agenda. I'd just like to make a suggestion, or actually I'd like to make a motion that we reverse the order. It seems that we have a lot more digging through the zoning bylaw to do than the official community plan. So I'd like to make a motion to reverse the order that we go BA. And if you're in agreement, a second for that motion.
Sure, I'll second that.
Okay. Then all those in favor of that switch? Okay. So I'll ask please for a motion to adopt the agenda as amended with the A being D and B being A. Sure. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Okay. Put the glasses on because I can't see. So moving to the zoning. So I think for ease of getting through all of our recommendations here, I'd like to start with the big items. Chickens, RVs, the heights, and the short-term vacation rental. I think we'll start there. And so just a couple of things, because there's so much to cover and so many suggestions. There'll be, we're going to do the Robert's Rule of Order, so no discussion of suggestions for change until a motion is put forward to change the bylaw. This will be easier for staff to track and avoid any miscommunication about what changes were accepted and what were said out loud. And we'll limit the discussion on each topic to avoid little side trails. We'll use Robert Rules of Order, so you'll speak to the issue and then a second time once everybody else has had a turn. If you've got something new to add, and I think this will streamline our process and help us get through all of the suggestions that were made by council. So we'll start with chickens. There were a few suggestions being made. So I think Councillor Barron had a practical solution, so whoever would like to make a motion on how we tackle this chicken issue, go ahead.
I just had a question. Is that does that actually belong in the bylaw, or does that go under a policy?
Yes. Through the chair, with chickens, you do want to have chickens in your zoning bylaw, but it should also be addressed through your animal control bylaw. Fundamentally. So there should be basically a use provision in the zoning and control of the other issues associated with chickens in your animal control bylaw.
So permitting and that kind of thing.
Permitting,
okay.
Fines for, manure issues and rodent, all that falls under the animal control bylaw.
So even if we went to the idea of a permit or a pre-inspection, that would all be handled into the animal control bylaw. It doesn't need to be in the zoning. The only thing we kind of have to hit in the zoning is whether
it's permitted or not.
It's permitted or not, and how many.
That's correct.
And currently the change has been from 6 to 4. So either a motion to leave it in there or a motion to remove it. How does council feel?
I'm gonna move to leave it in there.
Okay, seconder for that motion? Okay, discussion on that motion. Go ahead, Councillor Cool.
I did send a note about an opinion of our local conservation officer. I thought we should get that. I think it was in our mailbox. Did everyone see that? And they're suggesting electric fence is a good idea for chickens and bees. So I want to put that out there, and I guess my main question is, does our staff feel they have the tools to deal with infractions of the bylaw, like manure running into somebody else's property? Because if I feel they don't have the tools to effectively deal with that, then I'm having trouble supporting the bylaw in general.
Okay, to staff?
Thank you, Mayor Wickstrom. To Councillor Cole, at the current levels of poultry within properties, it is manageable within the town's staffing contingency. However, if we get several properties with poultry on them, it could start to be an issue. Depending on voluntary compliance. Every bylaw enforcement issue is different. Some people voluntarily comply right away. Others, we end up having to go through multi-steps to get them to comply. So if we end up having to go through those multi-steps to get people to comply, no, we won't be able to handle it in-house.
If I may, the tools are there to ensure that somebody's run off of their chicken and does not run into somebody else's yard.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So I've got a question. Would permitting and the requirement for a fence, anything we added into our bylaw, do you feel, with the experience of some of the complaints that you've had, that this would mitigate some of the issues that we're having right now?
So far, thank you, Mayor Wickstrom. So far, the issues that we've been dealing with primarily have had nothing to do with where the chickens are, or how many it's been smelled, which is extremely hard for bylaw enforcement to enforce, because smell can be subjective, and smell can also, by the time we get a complaint, by the time we get out to do an investigation, the smell may have gone away. So that's been primarily what we've been dealing with is smell. And as Councillor Cole mentioned, there is some runoff, but we do have tools that we can address the runoff with.
So you're not thinking that permitting can, because you'd be inspecting before they put the chickens in?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to smell,
Okay, thanks. Any other questions, Councillor Downey?
So I had some concerns regarding item A. It says a coop and run shall be located at least 1.5 meters from all property lines unless there's a solid barrier such as a wall or a fence. What would be deemed a solid barrier? Because a chain link fence is very different from a board-on-board fence. There's no reference to what the height of that fence would need to be. And it is conceivable that there could be a fence, however, chain link, short, tall, and this coop could be right adjacent to the property line because it says it can be located there unless there's a solid barrier fence, which means it could be adjacent to the property line, which fundamentally affects the neighbor's ability to use their property or the enjoyment of their property. If you have a chicken coop right on the property line, I don't think I don't think that's reasonable. I think that there can't be an unless. It has to be a fixed location.
Any comments on that from easy enough to do from Magdalene?
Yeah, through the chair, yeah, that's easy enough to do if that's the will of council.
Okay. We'll see if we get to, well, right now we're on the yay for chickens, leaving it in. Okay. If there's no further How are we gonna do that now? So you'll want to introduce after that motion some changes on where it is, correct?
Well, I'm forced to.
It's a chicken and egg thing.
It's a chicken and egg thing, yeah. Oh.
So, for example, I'm not willing to support the bylaw as is because it's as is, that's been the motion.
Okay, yeah,
So,
yeah.
so it's either vote that down and then suggest something else.
Yeah, or withdraw the motion and work out the little details, but that would be up to the person who made the motion. So Councillor Cole was just saying we're having a chicken and egg thing.
Call the question.
Okay, we'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay. So, what would you like to motion?
I would like to make a motion to amend the wording in A, that the bullet would say
Which bullet number or letter?
A,
Okay,
a coop and run shall be located at least 1.5 meters from all property lines, period.
okay. A seconder for that motion? Okay, seconded by Councillor Barron. Discussion on that motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Okay. It is carried. What other changes would you like to see on that before? Go ahead.
Well, I suggested electric fence if nobody thinks that's a good idea, but
Make a
I'm not
motion.
sure I support it even with an electric fence.
The electric fence could be a best practice that goes out in the animal control bylaw as well, right?
Would it be captured under the animal control bylaw, electric fence?
Through the chair, that's something that certainly could be required under the animal control bylaw through the permitting process.
So it's not normally in the zoning bylaw?
Through the chair, often not. A specific type of fencing is typically not listed, but it could be in this instance.
Councillor Downey?
As this 5.1 is written, I don't see any requirement at all that the yard the coop is located in be fenced.
Yeah, I know. So what we're, because I'm going to ask in a moment to reconsider. Once we get these details worked out, what I'm hearing is that it would be in our animal control bylaw, and then we could finish up with making a motion that those changes are made within the animal control bylaw.
I think if the intention is to have electric fence, it should be in the main document that everyone's going to read. They're going to read Urban Chickens 5.1, not refer to the animal bylaw. We're going to do it. I mean, it's just, I'd hate to see a bear get put down or any families or people put at risk.
I will ask staff if I'm correct in this, but our animal control bylaw, we often update and make changes as they become necessary or come to our attention. And it is much easier to update an animal control bylaw than to redo our OCP. Just confirm, and then Councillor Downey.
Thank you, Mayor Wickstrom. Yes, conceivably, we could have an amendment to the animal control bylaw done within a week.
Councillor Downey.
The other thing that's not noted in here is because we are approaching this first rather than the actual classifications that we have, there are specific lots that may be suitable to have chickens, and there are some that would clearly not be suitable. And this here does not address any of that. So does that then mean we're in each classification, R1, R2, C1, whatever, RM, H1, we're now having to go in there and put in reference to chickens?
Yeah, that's a good
Because
point.
there's nothing in here. I can have a 5 foot, I can be living in a townhouse, and as long as I'm 1.5 feet from property lines, I can have chickens. Well, is that reasonable in a congested area?
Yeah, that was one of my concerns too. I've got a note here. How do we stop people in duplexes who have common property? And townhouses and trailer parks aren't conducive to chicken coops. If you can respond to that, and then Councillor Barron.
Yeah, through the chair, if you look at 510B, coops run shall not be located within a 4.5 meter buffer from any habitable structure. That's going to control the location of any chicken coops, anything of that nature in that multi-family form of housing, including small level homes, tiny homes, townhouses, and duplexes of that nature. So that 4.5 meter buffer from a habitable space, you actually lay that out on a parcel, it begins to significantly limit the type of lot that chickens could be actually permitted on.
But what if there's a duplex, sorry, just to follow up to that, what if there's a duplex that has a common backyard? You know, and then one person moves and another one comes in and they don't want the chickens even though the two owners said, yep, we agree with it. How do we, because I actually had someone come to me and ask that question, so.
Yeah, through the chair, it's very complicated, and that would be a civil issue between the property owners fundamentally if you were to proceed with the way this bylaw is written. To deal with common property and things of that nature in a zoning bylaw specifically is actually very challenging.
Dr. Barron?
I was gonna say, the city of Comox just recently redid theirs, and I think they actually put parcel sizes on it. So you're saying that instead of going to parcel size, because I think they did a number of chickens per square feet or something, and if you were under this square feet, you can only have this many, and if you were over, you could have this many. So what you're saying is, by having this 4.5 meters, but again, I'm just thinking staff-wise, and Derek, if we had that idea where somebody had to go in and do it, or if somebody had to actually submit like a little rough site plan that shows, you're gonna find that maybe you can't have chickens on your property?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay.
Remember, we don't have to get this absolutely perfect, and it can sit there till another discussion, but this is all really good things that we make the changes that we need to try to mitigate whatever we can.
I'd like to motion that we table section 5.1 to the end of our conversation and we move on.
Okay, seconder for that motion? Okay, all those in favor? Opposed, carried. So is there, you know, I can be, is this, the way that we're going through this with RV in the big ticket items, is this going to be amicable to everybody here? Like, or are we going to be tabling each and every one?
No, I think we'll get
Okay,
somewhere.
all right.
Sooner or later.
Okay, great. RVs, that is section, storage in residential zones. There were a couple of suggestions here. I'll open up with the one that I
Can you
had.
cite which page you're on?
Oh, sorry, page, I have 21 because I still have my old copy because that's where I have all my notes, but I'm
I
not
have
sure.
20, I have 21 in the one I picked up from.
Oh, okay, 21 then. Thanks. I didn't want to start fresh with a brand new unmarked. Councillor Mitchell has said before that, you know, we like to capture or keep some of the things that are inherent to small communities. And I've been thinking about this particular one. And I guess I have a question for our consultant. I heard more during the public session about RVs on the road, nothing on RVs in property. So is this something that's generally being put in, or is this something we actually heard from the public during the consultation process?
Through the chair, this is something that was requested from staff early in the process back in August to look at these types of provisions. We did a best practice review around BC and developed these. In the surveys, it was really close to all of the surveys. It really came close to 50-50. People didn't really care one way or the other in regards if this was a provision. You're correct. People were more concerned about how the town begins to manage RV parking within the actual road right of way.
I'm inclined to see this removed. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm going to move that we strike section 513.2, 513.3, and 513.4.
So that falls on storage in residential areas.
You need 13.1, you don't want it to be a junkyard, right?
Yeah, but that would be captured, just confirm with staff, a junkyard issue, if it started to look that could be captured under unsightly premises.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Seconder for that motion? I'll support that motion, actually. There's two
So
seconds.
you're leaving the first one in, saying that you can't have derelict vehicles or more than 2 unlicensed recreational or boats. We're leaving that in. I'm happy with that, but just confirm.
Well, if it's captured under another bylaw, then I'll add that to it. We'll strike that one as well. If it's unsightly premises bylaw covers it, let's not duplicate it. Can I change my motion?
Well, except that there's two it's unlicensed part, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's important. So you were talking about leaving, because I think that's what I supported, is leaving 5.13.1 in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Okay, any further discussion on that? All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Okay, heights. I will find what page that's on. There was some concern about that. I think it's on page 8, grade and height. Is that the?
Well, sorry to interrupt there. I brought the height thing up because I took it to a couple engineers and they couldn't understand it. But once we got the other stuff that went with that, it made sense to the people who were smart. I'm not smart, this makes no sense to me at all, and I get an 8-foot high house. But once you put it to the other stuff in the back, so that was my concern, and I'm happy.
Anybody else have any concern about heights?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
actually.
Yep, go ahead, Councilor Downey.
Our CD1 zone allows for 10 meters. Let me just confirm exactly. Page 36, CD1 zone allows principal dwelling of 10 meters, and elsewhere through our document, it's at 8.0. So I wonder about the consistency of that, and I guess the other is maximum height of 8 meters. Has that been, I just wonder why we have two standards in there. And I have a follow-up question as well.
Okay, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, through the chair, the reason that there are those two standards is due to the existing bylaw. The existing bylaw, the CD1 zone, was actually provided height. There's one of the few zones that actually provided a height versus stories. When we reviewed it, we basically looked at the bylaw, and you look at your R1 zone or the various other zones, it provides heights and stories, which is very uncommon. So working with BCLS, we went through and went, okay, what is a typical 2-story height in British Columbia? That's typically 8 meters. The CD1 zone already allows for that 10-meter height.
So I guess my thought then is many houses now are having 9 and 10-foot ceilings. So what might be typical provincial may not be the standard building practices today. So should we be amending our bylaw to 10 meters instead of from 8 meters?
Through the chair, that is definitely a consideration. If you think the community needs that height to peak to facilitate the style of development the community wants to see, that's certainly an easy amendment. 10 meters isn't out of the question. That is a little bit higher than you see in most single-family residential zones, usually between 8 and 9 meters. But is certainly something that is an easy amendment if that's the way council wishes to proceed.
And if I may, Kevin, Crown Isle is one development that has a standard. What is their typical height? I have a hard time judging.
I need to look up, but the Crown Isle is typically a single-family home, type patio home. You're probably looking at 6 to 6.5 meters to peak the roof in Crown Isle. An 8 meter, you're probably looking at, what would be a great example? A standard 2-story home on a flat lot would be a typical 8 meter to peak.
Is that what we currently have here in Port McNeill?
Excuse me, I missed that.
Is that what we have currently in Port McNeill? Would that be the average of our 2 stories currently?
It'd be very close, yes. Again, that's based on my conversation with the land surveyors for confirmation. Like I said, again, if there is concern there, going to a 9 or a 10 meter height for a single family residential is not a major issue. There just should be some consideration around view plane, on the slope. If you have a big 10 meter, and that could begin to impact views. 10 meters is 33 feet high to peak, just for an idea. Typically, they deem a story at approximately 10 feet when you're going for that 9-foot interior.
Councillor Mitchell?
I think that I'm in favor of keeping the height down, simply because we have lots of aging housing and lots of infill lots where people can build in front of those who are already there. And by giving them another couple of meters, they're going to wipe out a lot of views. And if somebody really wants to have 10-foot ceilings, they have the option of dropping their foundation and staying within the grade requirements, the height requirements.
Before Councillor Barron, did you want to make any comments? Or
Is there a motion on the table?
No.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion that we reduce the height of CD1 to 8 meters.
I'll second that.
And my reason being is that's primarily going to be waterfront. There's properties to go in CD1, so they're going to block the view of people behind them. And I see no reason why people in CD1 should be allowed 10 meters and the rest of the town is allowed 8.
Comments? Councillor, actually, was it to the motion?
I had a question.
Go ahead, Councillor Downey.
I won't be supporting that because right now, while we're talking about is the people who are may build on the low side, what about the people who have, as you say, they're on a hill? What if somebody wants an extra foot just for a view? The other is that down at the end of each drive where Mosaic's property is, where it is zone CD1, much of that is flat, and so I see no reason why to limit it down to 8. If you want to talk 9, sure. I don't believe 8 is reasonable today. We say we want a modern community, well, let's allow for it.
Any other questions on the motion? Okay, all those in favor of dropping it to 8? Opposed? Carried. Did you want to make a motion for 9 or?
I would motion that we allow within our residential zoning to increase, well, actually, if I may first, I have one question that when I thumbed through this, I realized is important to me. It seems as though, and I think I was told this, but please correct me and I don't want to make wrong assumptions, much of the information in our zoning bylaw was pulled out of the original one. That being said, and also some of it's coming from our 1997 OCP. That being said, in that transfer of data from our zoning bylaw and OCP into these documents, has any of it been updated to reflect today's reality and best practices for buildings, communities, residentials, subdivisions, commercial zoning, different zonings? Has any of it been updated?
Through the chair.
Or how extensively has it been updated?
Through the chair, there has been minor updates throughout it. The actual foundation bylaw is consistent with pretty much all communities that I'm working in. There's very little in the existing bylaw from like a setback perspective, things of that nature that isn't relatively typical in the majority of communities. I think you hit something correct with that height. I think there's some certainly elements there. When you begin looking at the other elements like setbacks and things like that, it comes down to what do you want to see as a community for community character. But even the setback provisions in the existing bylaw now are consistent with what you'd see in the typical community outside of the CS2 or the commercial 2 zones. And I believe Councillor Cole had brought that up as one of his comments. Other than the commercial 2 zones, the rest of the zones are really quite consistent with what you'll see around any typical community in British Columbia at this time. But I agree with your comments. That height, that 8-meter height, there is, I think, some justification to look at a 9 or a 10 for your single-family residential, depending on, again, what is council wanting to achieve for that character of housing within the community.
Thank you. Any other questions on the height? Councilor Bernier had a question?
My question was just if somebody applies. So like I've watched a lot of what's going on in Cumberland right now, where they are, you want to talk about modernizing. I mean, they're taking old heritage homes with these long lots and they're saying you can put a small home in the back so that the kids can live in the back as they start their life. And then the parents eventually move into the back and the kids fill the house. And they're having to change their zoning bylaws, you know, kind of as a group. The last meeting I watched, they did setbacks for something that was right along Main Street. It kept the Main Street part and it was a narrow setback, but the back boundary allowed for cutting off and making another property. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at, like, so I guess my thing is, if we leave it like this just to get this process done, what's the process then if somebody comes and says, hey, I got this lot, I want a 9 foot or a 9 meter? Like, what does that turn into then? Because I don't want to see it then turn into 6 months of back and forth with the building inspector and staff and higgity-piggity, and when does it actually then come to us to go back and look? Because staff's only going to do what the bylaw does, right? So when does it get to a common sense point here?
Through the chair, I can easily answer that question. Process-wise, if you went with 8 meters and all of a sudden someone came and said, I want 9 meters, 10 meters, or 8.5 meters, that is a development variance process, and they'd apply for a development variance permit. That development variance permit would then be processed by staff, brought forward to council for council's consideration. Council's consideration of a development variance permit process of that is it a reasonable variance in keeping with the surrounding neighborhood? Right? And that's how council would assess that. Comes to council, council says yes or no. What would happen over time, you start getting a ton of variances of that nature, that's a signal that that's broken. And then you do a housekeeping amendment, a standard housekeeping amendment to clean those things up. Right? That's typically how it works. That's for any kind of variance you might get. Can be setbacks, can be height, can be lot coverage. Those are the typical things that you see varied through development variance permit. And it's a signal if all of a sudden you just get a lot of variances on one particular item. It's a signal to council and a signal to staff that you should do a housekeeping amendment to the bylaw.
So you're saying from a modernization point of view to go up to a 9, that like at this point, if we went up to a 9, that makes sense.
Through the church, it's reasonable.
Reasonable.
Yep. 8's reasonable, 9's reasonable, 10, I believe, for a single family is a bit high. But again, what are you looking for the character of your community?
Great. We have enough discussion on the height, we'll leave it.
I would like to motion that we change our maximum height for R1 and R2 to 9 meters.
I'll second it.
Want to speak to that motion?
Does R4 need to get captured in there as well? That would be townhouses, and that's typically where you'll see the higher heights.
Well, I would like to see us be able to do, like, again, Courtney Comox, their townhouse developments are going like nuts, and it's a garage with 2 layers up above. And I think for some of our lots that we could be zoned for that. That's a serious consideration, whereas right now it would just be, well, no, well then where do you put the garage? Where do you put the parking? Like, just make it easy.
So I'd like to add R4 into that as well.
Could you give me the page numbers on those, please?
Page 30, 31, and 33.
Mayor, for clarity, R4 is more closely aligned to some of the smaller lots that we have in town, lower density, so, mobile homes, manufactured homes.
That's not that. It's for single family, 2-family, townhouse, row houses.
Okay,
I believe you're referring to R3.
thank you.
Okay, sorry, I forgot to look up, I was reading. Councillor Mitchell, did you want to make a comment on that?
Well, I'd just like to reiterate that making a blanket change like that is going to have an impact on the sightlines of anybody who is listening. So I'm completely opposed to doing that. I think doing it on a case-by-case basis would be a lot better.
Councillor Cohen?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty major change. I'm against it as well. I think it's pretty irresponsible to just bring it up at this point. That shouldn't be something we floated to the public. It's the first time that it's come up, so I have a hard time supporting that.
I'm also inclined to go with the case by case. Though I know Board of Variance wasn't everybody's favorite, or not, variance permit wasn't everybody's favorite, but we have a method to go case by case. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay. For the time being, it stays the way it is. Short-term vacation rental.
What reason you want?
I'm just going to find it.
Page 19.
19, thank you, sir. Lost my posted note. I brought up just that, I noticed that the dwelling shall not lodge more than 4 people. So are we talking about, this is a principal dwelling where somebody lives in the home and there's a suite below?
To the chair, so the 4 dwelling limitations on bed and breakfast specifically, not vacation rentals. Vacation rentals are exactly as you mentioned. That's where someone is living in the principal dwelling and there's a suite below and they're renting that out like an Airbnb. A bed and breakfast is different, where someone is renting a room in the house in which you live and you're actually cooking the breakfast specifically. And then that one is where you'd be limiting the number of people staying within the existing dwelling in a particular room, all at one time. The original bylaw had 10 people, including the principal residences, and it was brought up that it has led, or there's claims that it had led to potential parking issues in the past. And based on that, we provided some recommendations on how that could be addressed. We mentioned 4. Some people said there's some concerns that 4 was too little.
Yeah.
So there is an opportunity in 4, go back to the original that was 10, or somewhere in between.
I'm thinking a family of 5, like, what are they going to do, leave one of the children behind? Go ahead.
Like this.
So this is 2 separate issues, vacation and bed and breakfast. So I want to address the vacation one.
Okay, please do.
And 592 permitted in accessory dwelling unit only where the principal residential use is permanently occupied. I think that's a great idea, but I think it should be permanently owner occupied. Because that means I can buy a house on Beach Drive or wherever. I can rent the top floor out to somebody on a long-term lease, and then I can turn the basement into vacation rentals. I could live in California and do that. I don't want that in my community. If the owner isn't going to occupy it, then I don't want to see it turned into a vacation rental.
So I've got a question on vacation rentals, because I know that it was in the definition when we first talked about this, and I thought for the time being we were not going to allow Airbnbs because it would be, there's a housing shortage, and so we wanted the building to catch up with the shortage. And if we just said that short-term rentals, which is also known as Airbnb, correct, was allowed, then what's stopping people from taking those suites that they currently rent out to people who need them and turn them over into Airbnbs? So I was actually surprised to read this, because I thought for the time being we weren't going to include it in the OCP, just the bed and breakfast part.
Correction
Chair.
zoning bylaw, not OCP.
I'm sorry, it's in the, oh, okay.
That's fine. To the chair, we had conversations with both sides. There's a lot of support for allowing it, but there was significant concern with exactly what you mentioned about eroding the potential rental stock. That's when the provision 5.9.2 was proposed, stating that they're only permitted when the principal residence is permanently occupied, to lessen the erosion of that rental stock that is in the community. If I also may, a zoning bylaw cannot control ownership or control based on ownership. There's a lot of case law around that where you can't say it must be an owner occupying it. You're unable to do that through the jurisdiction of a zoning bylaw.
That sounds like if we have concerns, we would need to strike 5.92.
If I may, Your Chair, if you have concerns with this, you'll want to strike the whole thing. 592 is the thing that actually protects the rental stock. So if you don't want Airbnbs in your community, you remove 591 through 594 completely, and you remove the definition of vacation rental from the zoning bylaw, and you prohibit them explicitly if there's a concern with the protection of your rental stock within the community.
And just to follow up to that, again, if down the road that changes, we're healthy, we have enough housing, we can go back and do an amendment to the OCP.
That's the chair, correct.
I think Councillor Mitchell, you had I forgot what order and who spoke already, so Councillor Mitchell, then Councillor Cole.
Yeah, thanks. So just to clarify, you're saying there's no way we can say the owner only can operate, has to live in short-term vacation.
Through the chair, not in the zoning bylaw. You have provisions in your business license bylaw where you could require it through your business licensing process. You can control a little bit of who owns and operates, but in the zoning bylaw itself, you cannot control tenure, ownership, things of that nature through your zoning bylaw.
So we could leave it as is here and then do something.
Through the chair, yeah, if you wish to keep vacation rentals.
But I don't think we're requiring vacation rentals get a business license at this point. Airbnbs do.
Bed and breakfast, yeah, we currently don't allow for the short-term vacations.
Okay, Councillor Mitchell, and then Councillor Bear.
I think the only thing I don't want to do is, I don't want to make it hard for the people who come here to work, like nurses, for example, in there. And I think most of that's captured by the agencies that bring them in, renting a space and then just rotating people through it. There's not a new contract every time a nurse comes in, or a visiting doctor. So I think that's covered. I really don't want to see this happen. And if I was in the business of renting vacation properties, I'd love this bylaw. So I'm totally opposed to it now that I see if we can't control who occupies the principal residence there, then I'm not in favor.
Okay, so this is not my forte, as I said before, but, so if we take out the 1 to 4, and I don't want to run a bed and breakfast, but I want to rent out whatever it is I have to rent, I can't do that?
Sure. If you want to do that on a short-term basis, you would not be permitted to do it under the zoning bylaw provisions.
Longer than 30 days, yes.
Correct.
And what's the amount for BC housing when it becomes a real pain in the butt for landlords? 6 months? Somebody's
The first month.
the first month. I thought there was like a break point.
I thought that one
After a certain amount of days or something.
was short term.
Yeah, through the chair, I can't remember when the Tenancy Act kicks in, but you're speaking to the Tenancy Act.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what that is, but I think it is that 3 to 6 months.
I think it should stay in. If we can try and control the process a bit through business licenses, but should have the right to rent to who you want to rent to and how you want to rent.
So I don't know
I'll
if there's a
just
motion.
I'll just close it. Is there no motion? Well, I'll make the motion. We remove 5.91 to 5.94.
I'll second that.
And you want to make a comment
I'll
on
just
that?
speak to that. It's like, you just do your homework and look where communities have done this. People buy up the houses and they don't live there and they rent them out. And you can still rent out your suite to your mother-in-law, your neighbor, or, people that need jobs and are living in our community, so.
Or you could have houses that are sitting empty because people don't live here anymore and the houses sit empty and they're not able to go for rent because they don't want to deal with renters, whereas somebody else maybe buys that and then they turn around and make it a rental property. Like, it's kind of, you hope people are gonna be nice about it, but if you don't have people that own the properties to rent them, then you don't have the rental stock.
If they can rent them right now, they just can't rent them on a short-term basis, that's all.
And that's what we need long-term housing.
And through the chair, just for clarity again, temporary or short-term under the bylaw means less than 30 days. Right, just for clarity.
Okay, any further comments?
Just for clarity, somebody could rent their house for 2 months for the summer to somebody.
Through the chair, correct?
Right, so
Well,
that-
that's a vacation rental then.
only if it's under 30 days. So we have it. So there is some provision for somebody to rent out there. If they're off fishing for the season or something, they can still rent out their house.
And so then, sorry, if we remove that, that heading would change then to only say bed and breakfast?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Any further comments? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Can you touch on bed and breakfast?
Yes, please do.
Is that allowed in all zones? I don't think it is.
Through the chair, it's allowed in R1, R2, R3, R4, and the CD1 zones. The intent of bed and breakfast is they occur typically in single-family homes.
So not in RM1 is our only distinction. Presumably because the lots are small, I guess, but if parking is adhered to, some troubles why we would exclude certain homeowners from the option of doing that.
Through the chair, bed and breakfast typically aren't run in multi-family forms of housing. It's not that it couldn't be, I suppose. You could allow them in buildings and things of that nature, I suppose.
Sorry, thank you, Kevin.
You could allow them in things like townhouses and things of that nature, I suppose, if you wish to do so. Again, it does come down to that parking issue and how many people you permit to stay there. Townhouses, typically a lot tighter parking. So that's why it's typically bed and breakfasts are ran out of single-family homes, just because there's more space for that use to occur. Basically, it's a modified type of home-based business.
I just have a concern about 4. I think 4 is low. If there's a family traveling and if there's, not everybody just has 2. Double income.
How many, this is maybe too much on the spot, how many bed and breakfast licenses do we have? Business licenses for bed and breakfasts in downtown?
Off the top of my head, probably about 4 or 5.
And you think back to the day when the ferry was running and you couldn't get a bed and breakfast in Port Hardy or Port McNeil. That just shows you how much it's changed in 25 years. Because everybody and your dog had a bed and breakfast then.
When I was on the school board, that's where we put out candidates for positions because there were no, the hotel stock was quite limited. So I bet that has changed. So
Huge change.
Okay. I just feel 4 people's too low. I like to make a motion to set it at 6. I mean, the ample parking is covered if 6 individuals drive all in their own cars, so. Anybody second that?
I'll find it.
Okay.
And why do we have the number again? Sorry.
Through the chair, the number is typically set to address impacts. Right? It says to control the potential impacts that when you have a full B&B, what that's going to do to the neighborhood itself. It's predominantly parking impacts. You could have potential other impacts such as noise and things like that. That could come from this particular use. Like I said, this is one of those uses that you're enabling a pseudo-commercial use embedded in an existing neighborhood. So it's about controlling those impacts of this use on the surrounding neighbors.
Councillor Downey?
there's no I don't see that there's a reference to how many rooms or how many people per room. We did have a B&B on the waterfront that had multiple rooms, and so there were probably 10 people staying there quite frequently with you know, a parking lot out front, which does change the neighborhood when you have cars from end to end in your parking lot and we do currently elsewhere. So, do you capture it by room or is it just?
Through the chair, you can capture it by room. The existing bylaw captures through the maximum number of people. So you could capture it by number of rooms, saying the maximum number of rooms that could be utilized for a bed and breakfast provision in a single family home are X number of rooms. You certainly could have a provision of that nature.
So I wonder if that is a way to capture it. If you have 2 rooms, maximum of 2 rooms, presumably that would be, you know, 2 car loads or who knows, right? People come all kinds of vehicles nowadays, but, because when they're in the home, we don't really care. It's really what the impact is outside and to the neighbors, depending how many people come and fill that house.
There's no other questions or any comments. Call the question on changing that to 6. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Anything else you wanted to add there, Councillor, or Karen? I think there was only one that had 3, right? The home is still available, they're not offering us the Airbnb. That doesn't mean somebody couldn't build something again.
Would this be the place to set maximum to make a motion that maximum of 2 rooms per dwelling be set aside for B&B purposes?
Is there a second for that motion?
Yes, that is correct.
I will motion that then.
Seconder for that motion? Okay, any discussion on that motion?
How many complaints have there found about too many people in B&B?
Through the chair, Mayor, or Councilor Barron, none since my tenure as the CAO. I'm not aware of any before that.
I'm not aware either when I was on council. Councillor Mitchell?
I'd like to amend that motion to make it 3 rooms. I could support 3 rooms.
Okay, all of those, I've been reading Robert's rules, all those in favor of that amendment? I don't care either.
I don't
so-
care.
Okay, so then it's amended to be 3 rooms. Councillor Cole?
I'm not sure what we're trying to achieve here. Is it like we just said 6, but now we're going to go, you can have 3 rooms and only 6 people?
Well, it's 2 for them.
But you could have 10 if you had a family of 4. Maybe they all sleep in one room if there's little kids, you know, and then.
So then we go back and change.
There's people that who have
We didn't
B&Bs
vote on
who
the
have that many
amendment.
rooms.
Yeah, we did. We just did.
I didn't hear the question called.
Oh, sorry.
I didn't vote.
Okay, I did. And you know what? This is the problem with the mask and this. It's like either we should, I feel we don't need both. It's just really hard to hear. But yeah, there was 4 that voted in favor of changing it from 2 rooms to 3. Apologies, I will make sure I speak louder.
Would I mark you as opposed, Councilor Gandy?
Sure.
So we're going to say you can have 3 rooms with 6 people. But why not, if it's 6 people's rather than 6 rooms, I just don't see a difference.
If the problem is the parking and the noise, it's dealt with through the noise bylaw and the parking bylaw, so why do we even, I still don't understand why we're saying how many people can go to a person's house. They load it up, they can load it up, put a whole hockey team, I could put a whole hockey team in my house. Like I could, seriously. With just the 2 of us.
And how would that change the character of the neighborhood if you've got a whole hockey team in there every weekend, right?
I got parking down the side, put a bus. Seriously.
Well, that's fine for your property, but I'm just saying, no one has that luxury.
Okay. We can also table this for the time being and come back to it.
Well, we've done with it, actually.
Well, no, we're not, because we haven't voted on we've just voted on the amendment. So I'll call the question on, if you like, or we can just table this whole thing, because you're right, we're gonna go back and forth, it's gonna be a chicken and an egg thing. Okay, we got 3 rooms, now we got 6 people, is that only 2 per room?
Through the chair, maybe I can help some clarity just to help decision. Going with number of people or rooms is both fine. Going with rooms, I think more clearly ties it to the number of vehicles you may have outside versus controlling number of people. You literally could have 6 people in one vehicle, or you could have 6 people in 6 vehicles. And so that's the question that council is balancing right now. You control rooms, you're likely controlling number of vehicles, the maximum of 3 vehicles to a B&B. You're controlling people, you're not, you're just controlling the total number of people. And so that's that balance of allowing flexibility for people running B&Bs and wanting to control that potential impact on the neighborhood. Through the chair, just to help provide some clarity around the decision.
Parking bylaw says 1 space per bedroom used in B&B.
So I'm going to withdraw my motion, because I made it. And if we want to change that just to 3 rooms and get rid of the number of people.
What was your motion that you're withdrawing?
I had the 6.
That was already.
We've already
Oh, that was,
voted
we
on
already
it.
passed that, sorry, yeah. Well, we can,
Well, I'll just move we strike section B.
section B.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's the number of people, because we've already added, how many
Okay.
rooms?
so before we do that, we have to call the question on the 3, a maximum of 3 rooms. All those in favor? Opposed?
Abstain.
Okay, it's carried.
No, thank you.
Okay.
I'm going to abstain.
I move that we strike B.
Okay, a seconder for that? Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. What did we come out of that with now? Do we have 3 rooms or not?
We have 3 rooms
We have 3
and any
rooms,
number
okay.
of people.
3 rooms and it covers, the rest is covered under, okay. Each one should have a, so is that, okay, thumbs up, great, wonderful. How can we get through everything else? Okay, well, I guess we can, we've got the list here on page 165, 167, through to more than 169, there's all the maps after that as well. Zoning definitions. Let's wade through these. Number 1, child care or daycare is not defined.
I'll make a motion that we include a definition of child care and daycare and list as a principal use in any zones. All zones, I guess.
Okay, seconder for that motion? Sure. Okay, discussion, or actually you want to say?
Sure, yeah, I just want to clarify that there is no definition of zoning, in our zoning bylaw, childcare or daycare. I don't particularly care what we want to call it. And I think if somebody's looking to start a daycare or something, they should be able to, from Vancouver or whatever, open up our bylaw and see if they're allowed and see where they're allowed. And it does, and it's, you know, we have a daycare already zoned in a C1, but it's not in our definition. So I think if we're redoing our zoning bylaw, we should take care of some of these items and make it as clear as possible for the average person.
Councilor Downey?
Just clarification, what document are you reading off right now, Councilor Paul?
This is page 185, and this is 20 notes I did on the zoning bylaw.
Is it in our current agenda?
It's at the very end, I believe.
It's at the back, yeah. It's concerns as brought forth by council.
And in those concerns, I referenced maps that I emailed everyone, and I noticed they weren't included in the agenda. I'm a little disappointed to see that. Hopefully we can maybe have some up on the screen later. But yeah, that's all
My
I have to
document
add.
only has 169 pages that I picked up at the door, would that be correct?
Yes, and but it should be at the very end. It starts on
165.
165. And it has one of Councillor Cole's maps. I think you just flipped it there, didn't you? Oh.
However, daycare is operating
They would operate under the generalization of a different title. So, for example, a personal service establishment, or and for clarity for council, in reading through Councillor Cole's definitions requirements, there are several that could be captured under general provisions in the zoning bylaws. So it really depends on how specific we want to get with our definitions, or if we want to leave the definitions broader for the zoning bylaw officer, myself, to interpret. So that's really the question. As you're going through the zoning definitions, could the use be defined under one of the more general provisions?
Go ahead, Councillor Danny.
Would a home daycare come under home occupations?
On business, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Cole?
If I may, yeah, I just wanted, if we are calling it personal service establishment, those are only permitted in C1 and C2. So if somebody wants to do that in M1 zone, or perhaps the forestry office wants to have a daycare in that zone or something, that's excluded. So we have a daycare problem in this town. I think it should be allowed in as many zones as possible, not just restricted to C1 and C2.
Any further discussion on that?
Is there a motion on the floor?
For it to, daycares to be, whatever it's called, childcare or daycare to be allowed in all zones,
And defined in the definitions?
defined in the definitions.
For ease of reading, it would make more sense than under that, because as a ECE who could have easily, who did run a daycare, I would have never applied under personal service establishment. No, I mean, everything there is personal service, looking after somebody's children, I don't look at it the same way.
Okay, so if there's no further comment, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item 2 was the zoning definition.
Can you back up? I noticed we didn't touch on churches. A similar motion.
Yeah, it's number 3.
Okay, well, it was number 5 above, but
Oh, right. Sorry, yeah, okay, it's just,
That
yeah,
was
you and I
something
had the same thing, yeah. Okay,
so same kind of thing. I'd like to make a motion to include auto body shops and auto repair shops in the definitions, and list the zones that we want them in. That, I guess, remains up for discussion with zones, but.
So could you please repeat the motion?
Sure, motion to include auto body shops and auto repair shops, each with their own separate definition.
We already have definition.
Okay, sorry. Motion to have auto body shop and auto repair shops listed in principal uses for C2 and M1.
I'll second that.
So if I may, Your
go
Worship,
ahead.
so currently they're listed. So if I'm average Joe, I look, okay, auto body shops, auto repair shops, and then you look in all the zones, and it's not listed in any of the zones. And we currently have them in M1, so that makes sense to me to include them in M1. And we currently have them in proposed C2, formerly M1.
and C2 is the one that's
C2 is
outside
the
of
ones
downtown?
just outside of downtown.
Yep.
Currently, for example, if we went ahead with this change, say our auto body shop, which is just right up here, is M1 now, so presumably that's allowed, but it's changing to C2. So are we telling that person they can no longer have any auto body repairs?
That's getting into legally conforming and non-conforming,
Yeah.
right? They're already allowed it now. If we change
Well, in
it,
the future, they're not. if somebody wants to expand their business.
But Kevin's given us the year and how it works.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, before you speak, I think that was one of the things that, like, for example, we said we didn't want any more industrial downtown. They all become legal non-conforming. If that's, you know, I think of Campbellton. Campbellton made some of those same decisions 10, 15 years ago. And now, over the years, Campbellton's changed. So if we're thinking of the future, it is going to put some non-conforming. What I think Kevin cautioned us is that we don't have so many non-conformings all over the place that it is a nightmare. But in some cases, we're going to have that if we're looking towards the future and what we want the future of our community to look like. Kevin?
Thank you, Chair. And this is actually a really good segue to this discussion. So yes, auto body and auto repair are fundamentally like industrial uses. So makes 100%, adding them into the M1 zone to reflect that use. Went through the original uses, it wasn't explicitly permitted, but it looks like the way it was interpreted over time that they're permitted there. Perfect, we can add them to M1. We add them to C2, we're literally creating another M1 zone, right? And so we just need to be careful there, and it helps. Part of that conversation, one of the zoning conversations is more of a mapping conversation is, and maybe now's the time to talk about it because, you know, we're speaking of this. There's a fundamental discussion that needs to occur is, are you keeping the industrial in the downtown, yes or no? Because that really is going to determine if this even really makes sense in the context of where council would like to see that part go. And this is probably a good time to have part of that conversation as part of this conversation of adding these uses to this particular zone.
I guess the dilemma that I have is we had so much input already by everyone, and now, I don't know, it's just, I mean, the public has seen our maps and agreed with the direction that we're going, and we're nearing the end of the process, and, you know, we're going through line by line. I feel like, yeah, at what point do we trust the public input and only make minor adjustments, I guess is my question, or what I'm pondering right now. I feel we could be months into this still.
If I may, Chair, there is another option that we haven't actually discussed, I don't believe. And that is you are able to change the proposed land use map to the downtown designation for that area and keep the zoning the way it is now. What that will do is keep them as legal conforming, but if they choose to try to change the uses in the future, they must be consistent with the OCP at that time. And it basically sends out a signal from council now and from the community that in the future, we expect this to change towards the downtown destination, which is that commercial use and things of that we talked about specifically to the downtown. So there's that intern step that you could consider as a council if now is not the time to change that to a commercial zone. So there is an opportunity there for council to send a signal that it's going to change, but maybe now is not the time for your community. And it's part of that, something you could contemplate as part of your decision.
Councilor Barron?
I think that sounds like a great idea because there's decisions that are coming down this afternoon from the provincial government that could change this town upside down. With one land use project that's coming in, we don't know. There are so many provincially made decisions that are going to be happening in the next 6 months to a year. We don't know what we're going to look like. We don't have any idea what we're going to look like. So why don't we make this like that? That sounds like a great idea because that's got the intent, but we may not even have half these businesses in a year. Like we really have to think that way right now.
How do we form that in a motion? Verbalize it?
To the chair, really the motion is to maintain the OCP downtown designation as discussed, and to maintain the existing zoning in regards to the downtown at this time.
Motion that.
There's a
Do
motion
you
on
have
the
a
table.
motion?
Oh, sorry, what's the motion on? I'm so sorry.
That auto body shop and auto repair shops are listed as principal uses in the C2 commercial 2 zone in the M1 industrial 1 zone.
Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
What that means.
Opposed? Carried. Okay, now, Councillor Barron's, motion via, as verbalized by Kevin, and seconded for
I
that?
would need to hear, I would need that read back to me before I would vote on that.
Okay, or can you, are we able to
I
type?
have questions.
Yeah, well, we'll get it seconded first or reiterated, and then you can make a comment. Could you verbalize that again?
I will
For us.
attempt to. Let's see,
Motion that,
I'm not the greatest at writing
the
motions.
downtown, what do you call it, the downtown business?
Yes, that the downtown area as shown on the proposed land use map. That comes of course the downtown area shown on the land use map. And that the existing zoning in the downtown be maintained.
And that existing zoning, just type it and then we'll take the part of it. Existing zoning be maintained.
The first part doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't, but it's gotta read the back.
Motion that the downtown area as shown on the proposed land use map be adopted or be in,
Remain as is.
remain as is, yeah. And that the existing zoning be maintained. Yep.
I thought the intent was is that we would like to get industrial island downtown, or that we don't have logging trucks getting
Yeah,
tired.
which is in the proposed land use map.
If I'm reading that correctly, that means if the tire shop sells, it can just carry on business as a tire shop.
Of course.
Are you sure that's correct?
But that's what you said the
I
rules
wanted to
said
state
too.
this and we didn't have a motion. We still don't have a
The
motion.
legal non-conforming.
Yeah, well, we don't have a seconder for
Yeah.
the motion, so
Oh, I'll second it then for discussion.
go ahead, Councillor Cole.
Um,
Please be.
Yeah, so I just wanted that to be clarified. Status quo is not gonna change anything in town, and if the tire shop wants to build a brand new Quonset hut, they can do that. Why is gonna compel them to change to downtown zoning? Other than, you know, us just, a couple of years from now saying we're implementing it.
Good, Chair. Great question, Councilor. So there's a couple of things. So what, if you were to proceed with this motion, exactly, it'd be status quo. To a point, you are adopting new downtown development permit guidelines. They would fall in the downtown development permit area. And therefore, if they were to construct a new Quonset hut, it would need to meet the design guidelines of the downtown area. So they would have to actually build to a better standard because they are designated in downtown. But they could, you're right, they could continue to do the use act under their existing zoning because the zoning is in place. Where it changes is if they choose, or say they sell the property and someone wants to do something that currently isn't permitted on that property and they need to rezone it, it then needs to be consistent with the downtown designation, and they'll have to rezone it to either a C1 or a C2 zone to make sure that it's consistent with the official community plan. But that option that council has as an interim option versus rezoning everything now to C2, C1, that is another option that and making things legal non-conforming, which means legal non-conforming means as long as they are operating and intend to continue to operate, they can operate in perpetuity. It's just an alternative that council has if they don't wish to make all of the current M1 properties in the downtown legal non-conforming. Does that help clarify?
That does, yes, thank you. But to me, I think the other option is just to include, you know, I have no problem myself personally with an auto repair spot downtown. The big trucks going in the dust and all that is a different story, but I think if we added auto repair shop, auto body shop. I mean, you've already put in here retail sales in C2, so one would assume auto retail sales in C2, one would assume that would include a garage or some sort of, most dealerships have it. So you've already said that's okay in C2, but suddenly now we don't want to allow any auto body or repair shop in C2, and this goes right back to the problem I have with saying no auto body or no this or that in town. There's nowhere to go. We don't have a light industrial area. There's no lots for sale anywhere else.
Any other questions on that motion?
Go ahead, Councillor Downey.
So this motion as it stands
Leaves overland freight exactly as it is. And the only way that property will be used for another purpose is if somebody says, I'm not going to haul freight out of here, I'm going to build a paint booth. That's the only way that would change. But if the property changes hands, freight depot to freight depot, it just continues in continuity until somebody decides, I'm not going to operate a freight depot there.
Through the chair, Councilor, yes, that's exactly it. That's the same as if you rezone it also. If you rezone it now, as a legal non-conforming, someone can continue to run a freight operation there in perpetuity. If they shut it down for a period of greater than 6 months without the intent to open it again, that's when they can no longer use that property for that purpose.
Does this motion allow that?
No, this motion does not turn it into the legal non-conforming component. This motion would allow them to continue to do whatever they wanted under the M1 zone. That's what the motion is before you.
I think that we need the legal non-conforming.
Okay, Councillor Mitchell?
I think, I tend to agree with Shelley. I like the idea that, because we did form an intent to change the look of downtown. But we don't have the tools. If somebody decided they wanted to move their tire shop and the body shop, there's no place to move to. So we obviously have to provide that somewhere down the line. And my concern is the business people that I've spoken to that own land in the downtown area about our zoning bylaw have no understanding of it whatsoever. So we have done a very poor job of communicating that this is what we're doing with our official community plan and our new zoning bylaw. Do you know how this is going to impact on your business? They go, no. And one guy said, I've been here for 40 years. Why would they change it so I can't, I can't operate, or I can't upgrade, or I can't, So if we're going to proceed the way we're proceeding, I think we need to probably think about actually notifying these people that we're changing the status of their land that they own, that they've been operating on for all these years, and it's going to change, might affect their future plans. And
So this motion would allow that, would it not?
well, but this doesn't take us forward. If we pass this motion, we're not moving forward. We're treading water. We're leaving things where they are. And I know, I feel like we need to move forward, but we need to move forward with informed people. Everybody needs to understand what's going on. I think that they really don't. Yes, there was some discussion, but don't tell me about maps. I'm looking at a map right now that I can't read. So, and I've got tons of them. I've got a 14 by 11 piece of paper with a map that's the size of a postage stamp on it. And that's what these folks went to public meetings and looked at and said they agreed with them. They could read it.
So this,
But I think there was more than just looking at a map and agreeing with it. I think there was discussion as well. One way you could overcome that is if we ever get to second reading and we have a public hearing, we utilize somebody like the chamber who reaches out to all the businesses and we, as well as business owners, give that public notice. We don't just put a little thing in the newspaper and call it a day and have, 2 people show up as per usual on our public hearings. We want to make sure that we capture as many as possible, and I would also suggest that it be a day separate from the council meeting, so that we have all those business owners in here, and that they're asking questions and that we hear from them. At the rate we're going right now, we're probably never going to get to second reading, though. Councillor
Councillor Barron first, and then you can make a comment.
So if I'm hearing you right, you're saying that these people who own businesses downtown, who may be affected, don't actually understand how they're being affected.
Correct.
So if we make this motion, then that allows us time, because what if we actually sit down and we have a whole discussion and we find out that, no, we want to keep light industrial in the downtown area? Because maybe we're going to put up a fence and a bunch of really pretty plants to hide it, and that makes it beautiful and everybody's happy with it. But if you do it the other way, where you change it to the other zoning, then you've lost that opportunity, am I correct? Because now you have to go back in and change the zoning. This is a real in the nitty, but then council has to make this a priority to either step it up or not. But if you do it the other way, then you've already done it, you've gone.
Karen, you want to make a comment, and then Councillor Downey?
Good, Chair, I just wanted to provide just some clarity around process. Once second reading is given, every parcel that we have a small rezoning on, so all the stuff that's being rezoned from C2, et cetera, needs to get a letter of notification mailed directly to that property owner, so they're aware, well in advance of any public hearing, so they have the opportunity to call and ask detailed questions. So I just wanted to provide just some clarity around the process. It's not just a public hearing. Once we get second reading, each one of these, if we're rezoning these M1 parcels in the downtown, a letter needs to be given to each of them explaining what zone they're going from, what zone they're going to, everybody that's involved in that rezoning, and how to get a hold of the town to be able to discuss this proposal.
Which is why it's so important to get to second reading, and we don't have to be perfect getting there, because the time that they need to notify the businesses. Councillor Downey, then Councillor Cole.
My concern is with leaving a motion that is status quo, there is nothing to actually prompt that discussion at all. There would be no need to send a letter to say that we are looking at rezoning your property if we are saying we're leaving it as is. That's my concern. This motion does not bring the discussion to the forefront. So I am not in favor of this motion, because we will not have that conversation. There's no opportunity.
See, and that wasn't the way I was reading it, the way my brain was processing it. My brain is processing it saying, you guys are okay here, but this is where you're going to. This is where you're going to.
But this motion won't allow for that. So Councillor Cole, and then after Councillor Cole.
No, I'll pass them. Councillor Downey made my point.
Okay, all right, I'll call the question, and all in favor of that motion? Opposed? It is defeated. Being conscious of the time, we have an in-camera as well. Is everybody, are we ending at 11, or are we?
I've got some commitments.
Yeah, I do, there are so many things in here that have been brought forward. We need more than just a 2 hour at a time or an extra hour at the beginning of we need if we really want to go through this, like some on council want to go through it, we're going to need more than just 2 hours here, and I don't have any more time. We either have to dedicate an afternoon, a day, whatever, and slog through this, or I'm at a loss on how to move this forward with every single, I don't know, maybe I'm incorrect, but I'm feeling like council really wants it to be near perfect when we get to second reading, and I don't know how we're going to get there.
I would disagree. I believe that we want to go through the document as we are right now. Our other one is 24 years old. We have witnessed engagement with other parties, but we as a council have not gone through this document, and I think it is warranted time.
Well, actually, we have gone through the document in stages. There haven't been any major changes since January.
But we're looking at a document that is going to go forward to the public.
Yeah, so and I'm not disagreeing with you. My point is just, we cannot do it an hour here and 2 hours there. I think we need to, if this is truly what council wants to do, the majority of council wants to do, which is what I'm seeing, I just think that we can't do it in our committee of whole is from 9 to 11.
then we have an hour before a council meeting. Like, we need to dedicate a day then to this and sit down and work through this. But we can't do it in 1 2-hour chunks. We're going to be here 6 months from now. Go ahead.
Well, I disagree. I think we can do a couple hour chunks and things could move quicker. Slogging through it a full half day or whatever is tough. We need to keep doing what we're doing. But that being said, I'm agreeable to a half day or whatever.
Okay. Without getting into the details in camera, how much time does council, like, if people have to be done at 11, we've got an important in-camera discussion.
We've spent 5 minutes
10:45?
having this discussion about time. Maybe we could just focus on going through a few more of these bullets and then at 10:45.
That's what I needed to know. Thank you. Okay.
Go on to the next things.
Okay, on to church. Or are we still at the story?
If I may, just for clarity, based on the last decision, I just wanted clarity. It is council's intent that we will wish to proceed with the rezoning of downtown as proposed.
Yeah.
Just for clarity, if we can get that confirmed, just for clarity for myself when we do tackle some of the matters.
Yes, that motion was defeated, so we go as was presented. Did you want to make a comment about auto body shop before we move on?
No, interesting. Moving
Okay.
forward.
Church definition? So I guess
we've all agreed that the churches need to be
in compliance,
in compliance.
and they're all
So
over the place, so.
just make the church, make it happen. Just do it.
That was the motion, make churches compliant?
Correct.
Through the chair.
Yep.
Very simple amendment, similar to daycare amendment. We could add a provision to permit church places of worship. I recommend using that terminology in all zones.
Okay, seconder for that motion, or? Okay.
I'll make that motion.
Right, seconder for that motion by Councillor Downing. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Marina?
Yeah, if I may.
Mhm.
Kevin, is there a reason we would have marina in C2 and C2 is not on the water, or it is kind of on the proposed land use I notice now?
Through the chair, marina is there because it was originally in the zone, because there were some historical C2 properties along the waterfront, my understanding. And so it was maintained there, just in case in the future, if people wish to modify zoning along the waterfront again, that use would be permitted. If that's not council's desire, we can certainly remove that use from C2.
Yeah, not too hung up on it, just let it clean it up, it makes sense to me, but I see now in the proposed land use area, you've got, the red going into the industrial area, so that is on the water, so. I won't be making a motion there, unless somebody else has a concern.
Anybody else have a concern? Okay. Your item 5?
Yes, if I may, Kevin, storage, commercial, to me, that's like, storage lockers and whatnot. So I don't see it listed in permitted uses, although it is in the definitions. And so I would like to propose we include storage commercial in M1. So that's my motion.
Second.
How are they operating currently?
So he's just writing just a second. So you've got staff. How do we handle that currently?
Just have a look at our.
We have David in M1.
I mean, we have one up on my road that's been there
Mhm.
longer than one. And
Pioneer
then we have,
Hill,
and then we
so-
have a brand new one. And we have
Under-
one on Pioneer Hill that's in the middle, so.
Through the chair, under our current M1 zoning, 1702E, light industrial functions including manufacturing, processing, assembly, warehousing, wholesaling, and storage is how they're currently being administered.
Yeah, so just a little motion on some housekeeping there. I mean, that is going to we've got some on Pioneer Hill, that's gonna make them non-conforming.
Through the chair, that's a reasonable amendment and the appropriate zone for that use to be in.
Want to make that a motion then, please, Councillor Cole, so that will be captured?
It was.
Oh, sorry, and seconded,
Right.
okay. Any other further discussion? Can I hear the motion again, please?
That storage commercial as defined in the definitions be included in industrial 1, M1 zone.
Okay, all those in favor? Opposed, carried. I think these are all yours.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead,
So
Councillor Cole.
again, a question for our planning, veterinarian services, how would they fall under, I was thinking professional services.
How are they currently?
Under professional services, which I thought it might be under, it specifically excludes veterinarians. There's no other definition or zone, and we have one in our downtown area, which, I don't have a problem with, but
How is it currently captured? Okay,
and this kind of rolls into my next question about kennels. I noticed other communities have those listed. If it falls under professional services, then that means, we could have that kennel downtown.
Through the chair, based on my read, veterinary services aren't explicitly captured. So it is a reasonable consideration if you want to add definition of veterinary services. Veterinary services typically is sort of that service commercial or light industrial type use. So if you were to, or if you wish to add an explicit zone to permit that, I would be recommending one of those zones.
you'd be recommending,
Either the C2 zone or the M1 zone. Or both.
Thank you, Mayor Wickstrom. Currently, we are administering it under the services to persons and households, including barbering, hairdressing, tailoring, shoemaking, dry cleaning, laundromats. It's a service to a person.
okay.
Vet and daycare, I wouldn't say.
So your motion for that then would be a definition for veterinary services and allowing it to be in C2 and M1? Councillor Cole?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Second.
Any discussion on that? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, 7, kennels.
Yeah, I just brought that up. I don't necessarily make all these motions, but if somebody feels we've got a gap there, then it's probably a small chance, but maybe the planning department can speak to why we don't have a definition of kennels or how you see that fitting in, what zone that might
Through the
be.
chair, it's not something that I've seen as an explicit use anywhere in the existing bylaw. Kennels typically are quite a rural use specifically. The existing zoning that is happened, if you were to want the kennel use, you probably want it in your A2 zone or something of that nature, because you do not want them in the community themselves because of noise and odor predominantly. But it is something if council deems, we could certainly find a place to add a definition and find an appropriate zone for it to occur.
So are you of the opinion by us not having a definition of kennels in here that they're not allowed at this point?
Through the chair, that is correct, the way the bylaw.
And the fact that we have a dog pound on the town land is irrelevant because it's our land?
A dog pound would be deemed different than a kennel. It'd be deemed a public use, and the way they're operated and permitted in zoning bylaws is fundamentally different. A kennel itself typically a commercial operation of some kind that someone does for profit. So there is, like I said, there is opportunity for it if you wish to add it, but it's not something that we specifically looked at as part of the review.
I'm fine as is. Move on.
Yep, I'm fine.
No, there's definition for cannabis retail, I noticed, but nothing for cannabis growing. I'd like to make a motion, we include a definition of cannabis growing and permitted use in, I'm gonna say M2, not M1. Just there's probably a long shot, there's an opportunity for economic development here. a legal product.
Seconder for that motion? Okay, discussion?
I say no. If you can't get over, if you can't handle the odor of chickens, then there's no way we're gonna handle the odor of cannabis.
I'd like to know where that would be.
Yeah, where's the? I love it. So really, I'm proposing M2, so the only spot that would be is, oh, right next to your office.
Yep, no, doesn't work for me.
Okay, any further discussion on that? All those in favor? Opposed? Defeated? 9, businesses in town that don't have definitions?
Yes, this kind of jumped out at me because we were making quite the definitions of automobiles and what you can and can't do. Yet we have 2 aviation helicopter repair places in town. So my question for Kevin, I guess, is would that be appropriate? We actually have zones where aircraft can be fixed. Like there's one right downtown. Oh no.
That's not a fixing place though, is it? It's a hangar. That's just a hangar that they lift off from.
No, I think they fix the repair as well.
Yep.
Because I've seen them go out and do their tests and then go back in and go out and do their tests and go back in. There's.
Yeah, and there's a fuel, they sell fuel there as well.
And how would that be any different than a marine mechanic doing a maintenance on a
It's just
boat?
not
And
clear.
vessel goes in the harbor and comes back.
Well, it's not any, except we define marine services in here, but don't define aviation. So that's the gap to me. Again, if somebody's sitting in Vancouver and wants to start their helicopter company, it's,
But do we want helicopters on some spots in town?
How is that normally captured, Kevin? Is it specifically mentioned or?
Typically, it's captured in multiple different ways. A lot of times it's captured specifically with airport zoning, specifically those sorts of uses. Aviation sort of repair, and that's typically an industrial use, just because of the nature of the use. There's a lot of welding, riveting, things of that nature, so it's actually quite a loud use in many ways.
So it would be captured in that red that it's normally,
Yeah.
that it's, sorry.
So there's no problem adding a definition. The definition, that kind of use, for the zones that you have in your community, because you don't have an airport explicitly in the community, would likely be M1 or M2, where that, if you wish to permit it, that's where I'd be recommending.
yeah. I'd like to make a motion, if I may, to allow, to come up with a definition for aviation / helicopter service and permit them in M1 zone. And that's just to provide clarity to the community.
Seconder for that motion? Okay, any discussion on that motion?
A question for Kevin. Are we getting into the weeds and setting ourselves up for hamstring ourselves going forward?
Through the chair, yes, you are getting into the weeds. No, you're not setting yourself up to hamstring yourself.
So we're just basically saying that the hangar that's downtown and selling fuel fits under what it is? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah.
As the bylaw is currently, it's permissible.
It's not fine, that's the problem. So we're saying we don't want any industrial activity downtown, but there's nothing to say that that helicopter place cannot continue there.
Yeah, but isn't that industrial on that map? Isn't it red? I see red here. Isn't it, that's where it is? Wouldn't it?
Not the one downtown, we have one on, off Mine Road, which I think is in M1, probably
What's
don't
proposed? Sorry.
You're looking at the future land use one, the current one. This is the zoning map, that's the OCP, big picture. So I do want to address as well. Yeah, it was a little confusing for me, but just for the rest of the council. We've got a zoning map, which is attached to the zoning bylaw. And then the proposed land use maps, correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, those go with the OCP. So we're discussing the zoning map right now.
So on the zoning map are the two helicopter companies in town operating non-compliant? Are they not compliant with the zoning that they're in?
I don't know where both of them are. My understanding is one would not be compliant with the existing zoning, and the other one I don't know.
The one's at the top, but they don't. Is it still, is Kestrel even operating still?
Yeah, we have one currently in the M1 zone, and there's one C1 right next to our.
So the one in C1 would not comply, the one in M1 would comply under the existing zoning.
So the purpose of my motion is just to have that clear for everybody.
To have it clear that it's not compliant? Or you're making?
Have it clear that it's compliant in M1, you can draw your own conclusions. It's not compliant in the other zones.
And currently it is compliant, correct?
I would have to look into these files, apologies.
Well,
Table?
I've made a motion, so.
She can ask to table it. All those in favor of tabling? Okay, all right, then call the question, or call the,
Can I get the motion repeated, please?
The definition for aviation services be included, and that aviation services be allowed in the M1 Industrial 1 zone.
I'll be voting against this motion. Don't know that it's more to feel like we're stirring things up that we don't need to. We have a lot of other things that are more pressing that have come forward from the community and been brought forward, so.
okay, call the question, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion is defeated. Short-term rentals, we did, chickens, we did.
15.13 we did.
Hang on a second, we've got 1042, we'll do one more. Agricultural, I guess 13?
Yes. I don't know if you guys noticed, but we are allowing rearing of animals in A1 and 2. For the most part, it looks like the town owns a lot of A1 land, but there is quite a large chunk that we do not own and we do not control. And it's the boundary of our community. So I propose the definition. I propose we remove rearing of animals from agricultural use in A1 and 2. That's my motion.
So if we do that, that makes those properties legally non-conforming?
Through the chair, if they're currently raising animals for agricultural production, then they'd be non-conforming, that's correct.
And if they're not currently doing it, but the same owner then decides after we pass this that they want to do it,
They would not be permitted to do so under the bylaw.
But other agricultural uses like food, greenhouses, that kind of thing. Okay. All right, was there a seconder for Councillor Cole's motion?
I'll second that. I don't want pigs in my neighborhood.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Oh, motion read, please.
That the rearing of animals be removed from the definition of agricultural use, which is allowed in A1 and A2.
Question, so that means that somebody who breeds dogs for resale will not be permitted then?
They're eating them. Right? Dogs, you said?
is it defined that they have to be animals that can eat?
No, it's not. It says the keeping and raising of animals.
Yeah, we
I
have an
confess, I don't know
animal
enough.
control bylaw.
Through the chair.
Yep.
Just for clarity, and this definition specifically around agricultural products. So, I don't know the proper name, but like raising dogs for sale would be a kennel, as per Councilor Cole's first comment. Raising agricultural products is fundamentally different. It is predominantly raising agricultural products for consumption or as a manufactured stock of some kind. This definition is specific to the Agricultural Land Commission, and there's key interpretive language in the interpretation that can help to frame that. But if we're raising dogs for sale would not be deemed an agricultural use fundamentally under standard definition.
Any further discussion?
You just said agricultural, that we're not into like down in the valley where you can only have, you have to have percentages of agricultural, like we're not, by changing this, we're not messing with any other law.
Through the chair, no, because your land does not fall within the agricultural land district.
Okay, calling the question, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, we'll stop at number 14. I will ask if council is prepared to give second reading to the official community plan, or sorry, the zoning bylaw. Okay, are we feeling the same about moving on then to the official community plan? Are we ready to give it second reading? Councilor Cole?
I know we went through the text last meeting. I think we pretty much agreed and got through most of the text, but we did not touch on the maps. And to me, they're very, very important, so I don't think we were ready. And this is specifically the proposed land use maps. Again, today we're talking about the zoning, but you know, when it says future highway commercial at the highway and Campbell Way, and you know, we need to have that big discussion about Mine Road, Campbell Way, future. So I'm not ready for second reading.
Councilor Mitchell?
I'd like to make a motion that specifically to do with industrial zoning, that we do a site visit to the areas that are proposed for industrial as a council. So some idea exactly.
Well, that's going to be captured when we get to second reading and it goes to public hearing. He was just saying it's legal that we have to notify every business and that will, or everyone that will be affected by the zoning change. That will occur regardless of whether we make a motion or not. Are you proposing council goes and does this?
Yes, the areas that aren't currently industrial are marked on the map. I personally need to see where the heck exactly, where are the boundaries more or less, and what are we looking at?
Seconder for that motion?
Second for discussion.
Okay, go ahead.
I think that would be helpful. I have a concern that we're not setting aside enough light industrial land, so I think it'd be great if council could come out and our new industrials from this to there, and you can get a feel, because I don't feel it's big enough. It's one of my issues with the proposed land use. Although it could come after second reading, after maybe the landowners are notified, Ryan, and then they might have something to bring to the table.
Sure.
I'm open. We're touring, say, the site. I like hearing the landowners are notified, because worst they might not like these changes, they may like the changes, you know.
Okay.
I'll withdraw the motion and I'll make it at the appropriate time maybe afterwards.
Okay. Okay.
Second.
All right.
Do we have to have those proposed land uses in the OCP?
Through the chair.
Yeah.
Yes, that is one of the legislative requirements, one of the primary purposes of the OCP, is proposed land uses and identifying where uses can go within the community.
Okay, I would like to actually make a motion then that we meet early at the next meeting again at 6 o'clock and continue to work through this at our next scheduled council meeting on November 9th.
I'll second that.
All those in favor? Opposed, carried. Yep.
So then we can leave this meeting unadjourned and just pick it up again on November 9th at 6 p.m. So before you adjourn.
Oh, okay, great.
Does that mean we don't do minutes of this meeting and they're not?
No, we'll still prepare minutes.
Yeah, we'll prepare minutes and then it'll be like we've done before where we just adjourn, sorry, what is it called? We recess?
Yeah, recess.
Recess it till November 9th.
There'll be separate minutes from today's meeting that will be done.
We'll prepare those for council's
Ahead
review,
of
just to
the next
ensure
one.
everything's been captured. Thank you.
Yeah, but they will be whole, continued in the next meeting. And adjourned.
I have a question for Kevin, if you don't mind, just on, it's 8.2, page 31, and it's the residential to R2 zone. Permitted uses says single family, 2-family, and manufactured homes. Manufactured homes are CSA approved homes. Does this mean we have trailers on lots adjacent to bricks and mortar kind of thing?
Through your worship, yes, that is what that means. It could mean. That is the definition of manufactured home. It's a CSA, I think, 241. But yes, it would also allow double wide.
Sorry, Shelley, we've got to get to the in-camera and Councilor Mitchell mentioned that he's.
Thank you. We'll be bringing that up at our next meeting, that we strike that from now.
Items, there are no items to be made, from in-camera to be made public. I'd like a motion, please, that council go in-camera under section 91A, personal information about an identifiable individual who holds or is being considered for the role of position as officer. Seconded by? Okay. All in favor? Those carried. Any questions from the public before you leave? Pertaining to what we discussed?
I'll adjourn to the next.
I'd also encourage you to compile any concerns that you have to be submitted for our public hearing process as well. Okay? Thank you. So move to go on camera.
Thank you, Kevin and Lynn.
Thank you. Seconded. All those in favor? Or sorry, and yeah, so how do we, so yeah, this is, should I have done that? It's not adjourned. Oh yes, now.